Hello and welcome to this impromptu episode of my thoughts on, and I'm coming on to talk about the Australian politics and community today. And what's prompted this? What's brought me to this conclusion? What's encouraged me to do this is pretty simply there's some things going on even in my own community here where I live in Mandurah that I think prompt you to and with things that have gone on recently in the United States, I think it prompts you and reminds you of why you need to engage. If you really, truly want to get things to work, if you really, truly want the Australian political system or Australian politics to work for you, then you've got to engage. You can't just sit there and sit idly by and blame politicians for everything that goes on. Because the politicians can only do what they can do under the circumstances. It's not an easy gig being a politician, having seen up close what it's like, having been involved in student politics myself when I was younger. I can tell you right now, it's not an easy gig to do. There's a famous saying, which is very real. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. You can keep, and what that means essentially is you can keep some of the people happy some of the time, but 9 times out of 10 you can't keep all the people happy all the time. It's just not going to work. And the reason I sort of wanted to talk about this is because I've seen, as I say, I've seen recently an event that a situation is occurring in my own, where I live here in Mandurah, which involves a redevelopment of the Western Foreshore area in and around where the main town site or the main area of Mandurah is. And they want to develop and they want to have a brewery and there's a few other things they want to do over there. And there's people in this community that are running around arguing against it, but they haven't actually put up any concrete arguments as to why it shouldn't be happening, other than the King's Carnival that's been there for a number of years shouldn't be gotten rid of. But it's old thinking. That is outdated, old thinking. You know, a community, a town, a city can't stand still. A country can't stand still forever. It can't keep standing still and acting the way it was. You know, that leads to problems. And I make the point that from 1949 till the election of the Whitlam government, this country, Australia, stood still under the Menzies, Holt, Gorton Liberal government, McMahon Liberal governments. This country stood still. It didn't go anywhere. Nothing happened in terms of modernising, improving, changing the country. Nothing occurred until the Whitlam government came along and got elected in 1972. This country stood still. And if a community stands still, it doesn't go anywhere. You know, I think we're seeing it, and I want to make this point very clear. We see it. If you're in a community that isn't going anywhere, is standing still, that's not government fault. That's not government's fault. That's not the local government's fault. That's not the state government's fault. That's not the federal government's fault. It's probably you as a community. It's probably your fault because you've allowed that to occur. We see it. A number of country towns here in WA that just haven't gone forward. They haven't evolved. They haven't changed. They still run the way they used to. We see it all the time. You know, things, if you want things to change, then you actually have to make change. You actually have to be prepared to make change. And change isn't easy. Change comes with risk. Change is not something that's just going to happen automatically. You've got to fight for that change. If you're not happy about a development like what's going on the Western Foreshore here in Mandurah, then you've got to fight to stop it, but you've got to fight to stop it in a smart way. You've got to have your reasons for wanting it to not go ahead. You can't just put it down to, we don't want things to change. That doesn't work. You have to actually have a little bit more than that. And I know, for example, as I've repeatedly said, people who want to stop that from occurring, particularly the brewery part of that from occurring, their best answer is to not be trying to fight local government over it, the council over it, but to go through the process of trying to stop the process of liquor license. And I know this from my own experience when I was involved in an effort to stop a liquor license occurring in Wanneroo for a liquor outlet. Where I lived, I was younger, we stopped it, and we stopped it cold because as a community, we gave good reason for why that shouldn't have gone ahead. And it didn't go ahead. And that stopped that. But not all development is bad development. Not all change is bad change. You've got to be prepared to look to change. And it's the same with people who complain all the time that they're not getting, support from the government. Their mortgages are too high. All this business. Well, you've got to start remembering that you've put yourself in this position. You've put yourself in this position. You've wanted to live beyond your means. You're living beyond your means. Instead of accepting that you can't have the house with everything in it when you first get it, you can't have 2 cars, you can't have a boat, you can't have this, you can't have that. You have to gradually get that over time. You've wanted it all in one hit. When my grandma was around and she came through, when my parents got their first house, etc., they knew that they weren't going to get everything straight away, that they'd have to work for it, that they'd have to be patient. Once there was a time when you bought a house, particularly if it was newly built, when you bought it, you didn't have curtains, furnishings, white good. You didn't have any of that. You had to get it. So often you'd see windows with newspaper in front of them because that's what they put up to block out the UV, to block out the sun to start with, until they were able to afford to get curtains or blinds or whatever it is that they were looking to get. They often started with concrete floors. They often, in some cases, painted those concrete floors. They'd paint them first. Then, when they could afford it, they'd get carpets and floorings and all that sort of stuff. But they worked for these things. They didn't get it instantly delivered to them. It seems to be now that everyone wants everything straight away. You can't have it straight away. You've got to work for it. You've got to spend time on it. And that's what I say about engagement. The system is not going to work for you if you just sit back and blame everybody for why it's not working. You've actually got to get out there and engage in it and put the time and the energy and the effort in to engaging, to telling politicians what you are looking for. Don't be frightened of telling them what you're about. If you don't agree with something, say so. If you agree with something, say so. But also expect that there's going to be challenge to that. And I say the same thing to certain politicians out there, and I know this is an example because my dad recently experienced it, where, a certain politician that he was speaking to, rather than engaging with my father and having a conversation, that certain politician told him to go away. Now, that shows me a very poor attitude on behalf of that politician, a lack of willing to engage, a lack of willingness to listen, to not accept every point of view, to be able to accept that other people's points of view, even if it's not what you agree with. And we're seeing this a lot. That's why we've got the problems we've got in the United States right now with a certain person. He is certain people, particularly a certain person. He is unwilling to accept that other people have other points of view and they don't agree with him. And he seems to think that if you don't agree with me, you're against me. Well, that's not the case. Not everyone is going to agree. You're not always going to agree with everything that anyone says. I don't agree with everything that others say. I certainly don't agree with everything that the Labor Party, which is the party that I support and I vote for, say. But what I then don't go around doing is I don't go around labelling people as woke or referring to people as left-wing or referring to people, etc., calling them by names. I won't do that. I will say to someone, if they are making comment that does that sort of thing, I will say, well, that's immature, that's being juvenile, that's being childish, and it's being uneducated, quite frankly, which it is. So it's all right to engage, but you can't just be prepared to engage and ignore anyone else who's engaging as well. You have to be willing to listen to every side of the argument. One of the things I learned very early on when I got involved with student politics is you've got to listen to all sides of the argument, because sometimes someone else has got something to say that turns out to be right or better than what you are proposing. And they need to be listened to. You know, I think I've seen it repeatedly. People get stuck in their corners and they won't come out of it. And that's what we're seeing here with this issue now here in Mandurah. We're seeing that. You've got the side who doesn't want what's happening on the Western Foreshore and the others that do. And what tends to happen is you get these vocal minorities that rise up in a community against something. They tend to be against more often than for. They tend to be against. And they tend to be the vocal minority. And they tend to be very loud. And they tend to like to be very loud. At the end of the day, they don't represent the whole community as a whole. And that's what a council or a government's got to do. They've got to govern for everybody, not just those that elected them, or not just those that are voicing their anger or voicing their opinion. Because nine times out of 10, those that are voicing their opinion are a vocal minority. They're a minority group. They're not a majority. So the governments have got to be able to govern for everybody. And it's very important to remember that. Governing is not easy. There's a saying that's very accurate and very true to this day, and I totally agree with it. And that is this: that you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. Government is harder. Governing is harder. It takes time. It takes work. It takes negotiation. It takes compromise. It takes all of those things. And you're not going to get everything you want, but you're going to get as close as you can to what you want as a government. So that's why sometimes when people complain that the Albanese Labor government's not moving fast enough, they're not moving fast. No, because they can't. They can't fix everything in 5 minutes. They've come to power after 9.5 years of a Conservative government that did nothing. They did nothing in housing. They did nothing in energy. They did nothing for climate change. They did nothing for a heck of a lot of things. I can go after category after category after category where they did nothing. The same thing you're seeing in the UK now. You've got a Labor government that's come to power after 9.5, 14, whatever how long of a Conservative government, and a Conservative government that let the rot set in because they were too busy worrying about themselves. So now you've got a Labor government that's come into power that's got to fix a lot of it, and it takes time. Nothing gets fixed straight away. You can't flick your fingers and everything will be fine. It doesn't work that. It takes time and effort, and it's up to every one of us as well. Even though we vote, it's up to us to continue to engage, but to engage in a constructive way. Not to engage in a negative or a bullish or I'm not willing to listen because my way's the highway way. It's my way or it's the highway way. proper engagement and accepting sometimes that we're wrong, that someone else is right. There was once a politician here in Australia. His name was Jim Killen, and he was a politician. He was a Liberal politician through the late 60s, the 70s, into the early 80s. And he was once showing a young newly elected MP around federal parliament. And that newly elected MP walked into the chamber and said, show me the enemy. Show me the Labor Party. To which Jim Killen turned around and said this: they're not the enemy. They're the opposition. The enemy's sitting behind you in your own party. And that's the reality of the fact. The Liberal Party of Australia, and I've always felt this, is not the enemy of the Labor Party. Likewise, the Labor Party is not the enemy of the Liberal Party. It's the opposition. The Greens are the opposition. Whoever's the opposition. 9 times out of 10, those that you can't trust are sitting in the same party you're in. They're the ones you really can't trust in politics, not the other side. So that's why everyone's got to listen and work together for a common good and engage. And I include the media in that. The media's got to be involved in engaging properly. The media's got to be involved in engaging properly and not give airtime, constant airtime to people who shouldn't be getting it, because they're talking gibberish. So when it comes to Australian politics and community, engage in it. If you're living in a community that you feel needs to change, engage in that process. Run for office. Run for local government. Vote in a local government election. Because believe it or not, in Australia, as it is in just about anywhere else in the world, your best chance to actually have any real serious involvement in government is actually at local level. So get involved. Engage. Join the debate. Join the conversation. But be respectful of others that join that conversation that might have a differing opinion. If you're an existing politician on either, whether you're in the Liberal Party, whether you're in the Labor Party, whether you're in the Greens, whether you're an independent, whatever you may be, remember that respect the other side and their opinions. Disagree with it, by all means, but don't be nasty about it. Unfortunately today there's some very, very, very interested, and they're on both sides. Don't get me wrong, they're on both sides. But there seems to be a lot on one side and the other who are very nasty. They're very nasty about it. They're very nasty about things. They don't agree with the Labor Party or they don't agree with the Liberal Party, not because they don't agree with the policy or they're not prepared to. It's just because, they're Labor or they're Liberal. And they're nasty about it. We can't be doing that. We have to listen. And politicians, you need to listen to your community. You need to listen to those that are in your community that might have contrary views to what you believe in. You might like what you're hearing, but you still need to listen to it. And likewise, if you're involved, like I'm saying, with this particular issue in community in Mandurah, you've got to accept sometimes that your views and your opinion isn't the view or the opinion of the majority of where you live. And just because you're a vocal minority that's voicing one opinion doesn't mean it's everybody's. So you've got to be very careful not to wrap everybody up in it. As I say, I come back to this point I'm going to finish with. Engagement is everything. Engage respectfully, engage wholeheartedly, but accept everybody's point of view and understand that you might be part of the vocal minority, but there is a silent majority out there that doesn't agree with you on everything you believe. And sometimes, change is a good thing. It's scary, I know. It's scary, but it's a good thing. Because change helps us grow and evolve and get better. Catch you next time.